Which of these schedules will most likely have a post-reinforcement pause and a scalloped pattern on a cumulative graph? A, fixed interval, B, fixed ratio, C, variable ratio, D, variable interval. The correct answer is fixed interval. So a fixed interval provides reinforcement for the first response following a fixed duration of time. And we have this post-reinforcement pause, which means right after potential reinforcement is received, there's a pause in responding. And then we have some responding, but usually not a lot. And then suddenly you see a significant acceleration towards the end of the interval. So if you look on page 308, it shows you how it looks on a cumulative graph, which is like a little scallop climbing. So the rate of response is slow to moderate, so nothing quick here. It's important to note when we think about this. So the question asks us, which will most likely have a post-reinforcement pause? The only ones that have a post-reinforcement pause are going to be the fixed schedules, because a variable schedule, you could potentially be reinforced the next 10 seconds. You could be reinforced the next time that you did the behavior. So fixed schedules are both going to have a post-reinforcement pause. The fixed interval is the only one with that scallop, because unlike a fixed ratio where you essentially still control how often you're reinforced, right? If I told you every 5 times you raise your hand, I'm going to give you a Skittle, you actually control how many Skittles you get by the end of class, because you could raise your hand 500 times between now and the end of class. I don't know that I would love that because that seems overwhelming, but you could, and you would get X number of Skittles, right? With fixed interval, the person is not in control of how often they're reinforced, no matter how often they do the behavior. They only get it after they have done the behavior and that interval has elapsed. So the first time they've done the behavior after the interval's elapsed. So that's why we see that scalloped pattern on a cumulative graph. So just to make this crystal clear, though, because I've had students get confused on this in the past, we don't take data typically on a cumulative graph. There's nothing special about fixed interval schedules and a cumulative graph other than if you graph it on a cumulative graph, it looks like a scallop. It's just a way to visualize that we have a really low level of a responding, or essentially no responding, and then a sudden spike in responding right at the time that the interval is almost done, because we know at that point that the behavior is actually going to be reinforced. So think about if the casino, before you went to the casino, was like, every 2 minutes when you pull the lever the first time, then you will win $500. You definitely wouldn't pull the lever or put any money in it for the first 1.5 minutes. And then for the last 30 seconds, you're like, because you know that one of those times is going to be the win. Another example of this is if anybody is like a Disney fan and goes to Disney World, they have certain rides that if you don't get in this queue at 7 in the morning, you do not get it. So there's a bunch of exhausted parents up at 7 in the morning waiting for the last 10 seconds because you have to refresh, and then hit the button at exactly the right time. That's a great example of a fixed interval schedule of reinforcement, because the button is only available if you refresh directly after this interval has passed, being 7 o'clock in the morning, and it's not available anytime before then. And after about 15 seconds, the queue is full for the first half of the day, and you're out of luck if you want to ride Guardians of the Galaxy. So that's a great example of a fixed interval scheduled reinforcement. I'm not up at 4 in the morning just refreshing for no good reason, because I know it's only available at 7. So that's when I'm going to be refreshing my phone consistently, which, by the way, I had a friend say, I've never heard of someone who got that high in the queue. I was like the 5th person. And they were like, literally, I've never heard of someone. And I was like, all those years of video games finally paid off. It's the one moment that it but that's a great example of a fixed interval schedule of reinforcement. So again, we're going to have a pretty big pause when we know that timer hasn't elapsed, and we're going to get an accelerating rate towards the end of the interval. We're going to start doing that much more often, whatever that behavior is. This is me asking for reinforcement. Well, potential reinforcement.